So may the Lord bless the reading of His Word. And so we come now to our subject for this evening, which is doing good work. We've covered the difficulties and the dangers of work and why is there work in this world and so on. But we mustn't fall into the trap of thinking purely negatively about work, which is in some sense what we've been covering in the last few studies. We should also strive to work well and to do well. And in our passage in Ephesians chapter 4, we see that when a person becomes a Christian, when a person knows the Lord, that all things are passed away, all things are become new, and that we should no longer walk as we once did, like the rest of the people, and that we should have a concern to learn Christ, to put on Him, to be molded by the truth that is in Jesus, and to be renewed in our mind, in our thinking. And in fact, in our passage in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 28, it actually gives us one of the applications of this, which is towards work. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. That even when we come to know Christ, even our attitude and our approach to work is changed and is different from what it was before. I'm not saying that people here are thieves and are stealing and therefore have to turn away. Of course, if that's the case, then we must. But we want to see that this applies more to just that becoming a Christian means that even the approach that we have to work is different, is new. And it is an obvious truth that it is not good enough to just have religion on a Sunday. And it's not even good enough to have good devotions during the week or a good family life. Our conduct should flow into all of life. And that's what the passage is telling us in Ephesians chapter 4, that knowing Christ makes a difference in all of life. If in our speech, in our temper, in our work. And it should affect us and should change us, that we think differently about our work, and we should strive to do work well. And we want to see in our other passage, which was 2 Thessalonians in chapter 3, here, that the person who will not work ought to be rebuked. In verse 10, for even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. For we hear that there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but are busybodies. And you see the result of people who have a negative or a wrong attitude towards work. They become busybodies and they should be rebuked. In verse 12, now those who are such we command and exhort through our Lord Jesus Christ, that they work in quietness and eat their own bread. In verse 13, but as for you, brethren, do not grow weary in doing good. And if anyone does not obey our word in this epistle, note that person and do not keep company with him, that he may be ashamed. Now, of course, in verse 13, when it says, do not grow weary in doing good, it's not applying it just to the previous exhortation, which is to not be busybodies, to work and so on. It applies to the entire epistle. But it does include that part. And we have to see that working well is doing good, not just for ourselves, not just to get the promotion, not just to please our boss, but to do well for the Lord. To work well is well-doing, is doing good in the sight of the Lord. And this is what we are concerned about today. Now, on the subject of doing good work, there are many, many books that are written on this subject. If you go to any bookshop, it's one of the best-selling genres out there. You have so many different books which are about work. There are books that are perhaps a bit more technical in nature, but basically, whether they're textbooks or guides or so on, they're there to help you to become better in whatever industry that you are in. There are books that are trying to inspire you and motivate you to find out the secret to productivity. There are biographies about titans or champions of business or in their field, people who have made it big in their field. And people read these books. People like to read these things to inspire them, to make them better in their work. And even in Christian circles, actually, there are quite a number of books that are written on the subject of work. And there are quite a number that say what is good and what is right. They talk about some of the things that we've talked about previously, the dignity of work, that God is concerned about our work, that God works. They talk about the idea of calling. They talk about meaning and purpose in work. But especially with the more recent books, what you find and what you see is that a lot of them, they will have a large proportion dedicated to the Christian being an influence in the workplace and an influence on society. And basically promoting this idea that a Christian person who is in the workplace, they have the right idea that it's a good thing to be in work. Not everyone has to be working for the church and so on, but they emphasize this point about the fact that we should be making an impact in the world, that it's part of the Christian mandate, or what they call the cultural mandate, to make things better in the world and to do something noble to transform the world. And there is something good and something noble about this. There is some truth in it, because Christians throughout the centuries have been greatly used to improve the social conditions of this world. The classic example is William Wilberforce and the abolition of slavery in Britain. William Wilberforce was not a pastor or anything like that. He was a politician, and he campaigned and he dedicated his life to ending slavery in Britain. And of course, this was driven by William Wilberforce's religious conviction. And there are many other examples we can give as well. Even in our nation, there are many institutions, many schools, many orphanages, many charities that have a Christian background. And many of the first such institutions, the oldest schools, the oldest hospitals have Christian names in this country. And it's the same all across the world. And so we mustn't forget how much arises from the Christian ethic. It is surprising to many how much blessing Christian people have done, how much blessing Christian people have been for the world. And we should take note of this. We should recognize that this is God's blessing on the world. This is part of Christian people being salt and light in the world. And this is, of course, not just isolated to the history of the church. You think of Joseph in Egypt. He was there because he was sold into slavery, but he became Prime Minister of Egypt. And what did he do in Egypt? He didn't just save his family, the Israelites. He delivered the Egyptians and even the wider world from famine. And he built up the glory of Egypt. He made Egypt a glorious nation in his work. And a similar thing can be said of Daniel. A similar thing can be said of others in the Bible as well. And to an extent, there is something to this in which we should think, is the work that I do good work? Is it something that benefits people? Is it something that helps people? We don't have to strive to be high and mighty like William Wilberforce and things like that. But of course, our work has a purpose even in this world, in loving our neighbor and so on. But we are talking about Christian books, and a lot of Christian books have taken this idea and they have made it the focus of what a Christian should be thinking about in their work. And it is too imbalanced. in the sense that when you think of Joseph, they were not trying to be a big change in the world. They were simply, as they were diligent and as they had a concern for people around them, they did make a big change in this world. But they didn't start out, they didn't have these big and lofty ambitions to change the world, which in the mind of many Christians, they are, those influenced by this book, by these kinds of books, they have this, ambition that we should create a Christian presence in our industry and so on. And you want to be careful of ideas like that is going a bit too far. And as much as we recognize Christian influence in the world and so on, it's not the Christian's purpose or the Christian's mandate in the world or even in the workplace. And we find that there's very little biblical support for thinking in this kind of way. And in fact, you would see that this kind of thinking is very appealing, and that's why it's appearing in books and why it sells well and so on, because more and more in society, a lot of people struggle with some of these issues of what is the purpose of my work and wanting to make a wider contribution, making an impact and so on. And a lot of people, they are basically trying to give a Christian response to this and trying to present it such that the Christian way gives you this purpose, gives you this answer in your work, and perhaps it does, but the emphasis has gone too far. And this kind of thinking that Christians should transform culture and things like that is thinking that comes in when Christians are a significant enough grouping in society, and it comes in different forms through the centuries. In the 1900s, it came in the form of theonomy, but now it comes in this kind of idea that you go and redeem and transform culture. It applies to politics as well, and how Christians think about politics and think about the world and their relationship to it. But we're just focusing on work today, and when you're coming back to books, when you look at not the modern books about work, but the older Christian books, from Luther to Calvin to the Puritans, of course they worked in a very different economic environment, but you find that they have a very different emphasis when it comes to what they write about the subject of work. And you can look at books such as Richard Baxter's Christian Directory. It's a massive volume, something like this, basically giving directions on any possible question that you might have. And quite a portion of it is dedicated to people in different occupations, ethical questions that you have to think through. There's another book, The Workman, His False Friends and True Friends, and The Religious Tradesman by Richard Steele. And in the final one, The Religious Tradesman, what are the subjects that are covered in the book? It begins with choosing a calling, choosing a job, basically, or what you're going to do for your life. And then you find that the focus of the remainder of the book is prudence and discretion, diligence, justice, truth, contentment, religion. And you see that in many of these old writers, this is their focus. This is what they are concerned about. Very different from the newer books, that they were concerned about how do we do work with Christian values, to work in the right way. And how often do we think about that? Isn't that so different to thinking about what a high and mighty impact that you can make in this world? Somehow it's a question we think very little of. How can I do my work well, with diligence, with justice, with truth, with happiness, with contentment? And of course, my belief is that this is much closer to the scriptural emphasis when it comes to doing good work. When you read what we have read in Ephesians chapter 4 about what difference does it make to be a Christian in the world, is that we should live according to biblical values. We should live in a different way to those around us. In Titus chapter 2 and verse 12, it says that the Lord Jesus Christ has appeared in Titus chapter 2 and verse 12. For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men, verse 12, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lusts, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in the present age, looking for the blessed hope and glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. And you see that we have to live in the present age. When we work in the world, we have to be in the world. We have to work. And we should desire to work because work is good. But how should we do it? Soberly, righteously, and godly. And that really should be our concern. Now, that would make for a good header for our talks, the rest of our talk today. But we won't use that. We use something similar to what was mentioned earlier when we talked about Richard Steele's book. So I just want to put before you four or five key values that help us to do good work. The first is diligence, followed by justice and truth, and then wisdom, and then contentment. So these four values. So the first is diligence. And we have mentioned much of the dangers of idleness, but we want today to just mention briefly the blessings of diligence, of working hard, of working well. Well, the first blessing of diligence is that it produces results. What great thing has ever been accomplished without effort? The famous quote of Thomas Edison, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Diligence produces results. That alone should be a good enough reason for us to work hard. Well, diligence also is greatly valued by others. In 1 Kings chapter 11, it tells us that Jeroboam was noticed by Solomon because he was industrious. It says in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 28, the man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor, and Solomon, seeing that the young man was industrious, made him the officer over all the labor force of the house of Joseph. Now, of course, Jeroboam turned out to be a disappointment. It's not good enough just to be diligent, but it doesn't change the fact that people value a hardworking person. And even when diligence doesn't produce results, it actually produces the best comfort. Sometimes you work hard, but it seems to come to nothing, or you're frustrated that it's not used, seems like a waste of time. But, I dare say that in all of our experiences, you would find more inward peace and satisfaction after a day that has been well spent in doing good work than in a day spent in just pure laziness. There are, of course, days where we rest and where we take a break and so on. I'm not saying you have to work every day, but there is an enjoyment, the enjoyment of a blessed day's work, of a hard day's work. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 12. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much. And so be diligent in things big and small, and how you use your time. Be diligent. It's not about being a workaholic, or being slavish to your work, but in its proper place, you must be diligent. You must work well, because after all, remember how the Bible puts us in our places of work. We're not just workers or laborers or staff. We are servants. And the Bible expects us to think of ourselves as such. We serve the Lord, but even in our places of work, we serve others. We serve our masters. Nobody these days would use that word. If you try to hire someone and call them a servant, they would probably spit in your face. But in the Bible, this is how we ought to think of ourselves. We are servants, even in our work. We are servants, of course, in our service for the Lord as well. And we should not despise that. It's a blessed thing to be a good and a faithful servant. And of course, the first thing of any servant, the first thing you expect of any servant is that they are diligent. Now, the second value we want to consider is justice and truth. We'll consider them together because in some sense they are twins. Well, when it comes to diligence, one aspect of diligence is you don't want to cut corners. You want to do things the right way. You don't want to make things easier for yourself by deceit, or you don't want to gain more in an underhanded way, just because it's available to you, you take it. And I think it is something that many Christian people in industry or in commercial work or whatever, they would say, you don't know how much I gave up because because I just couldn't in good conscience take a contract. People will say that sort of thing to you. And certainly, in a sense, doing things in an underhanded way can be so tempting. It can produce it can give you so much money. It can be so easy. You can be pressured to it by your colleagues, by your boss, and so on. But in Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 17, we've considered some of this, so we don't go through everything. But Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 17 says, bread gained by deceit is sweet to a man, but afterward his mouth will be filled with gravel. Remember that as well. You have seen so many examples of people who have been corrupt, who have done underhanded things, and you have seen them exposed, and you have expressed your disapproval of them. You have talked about the politicians, and you have talked about this or that rich person. Everyone knows they are corrupt. Everyone knows that they have do things in a deceitful way. They've stolen from the nation and so on. But when the temptation comes for you, remember that. Afterward, his mouth will be filled with gravel. Remember that the Lord will judge, that the Lord might even expose in this life. Remember, it ultimately never pays to do these things. Do things in righteousness, in godliness. Do things that are right and good before the Lord. Have no fellowship with evil. Avoid even the appearance of evil. And that's what a Christian person should be. A Christian person should be as upright, the most upright person, the person who is willing to say no, the person who is willing to be ill spoken of in the place of work, as if it is for justice, if it is for what is right and what is good. So beware of that temptation. It is a very real temptation, and some of us, of course, are more prone to it than others. But where we are, we must be watchful. But even more than just avoiding falsehood and wickedness, we want to see positively that we ought to actively uphold justice. In the doubtful case, in the gray area, take the safer path every time. If you're not sure, you can consult others. You can ask about it in church. I'm not sure whether I should make a decision like this. But take the safer path. If you're uneasy about it, your conscience troubles you, it's for a reason. You must examine things against the word of God. Never do things in a troubled conscience, against a troubled conscience. And in our dealings, if we ever do wrong to others, if we ever have dealt unfairly, if we ever slip and we have committed what is not right, we have committed deceit of others, we should never take the attitude, I got away with it. But we rather should do our best to make restitution, to recompense others. The system of law does try to recompense others, where if you're found out, the system of law will try to take the money off you, to pay it back, and things like that. People can sue you and so on. And these are designed to protect people who have been victims of fraud or victims of injustice. But the Christian, when he has wronged someone or offended someone, should do these things willingly as someone who loves justice. Don't you see that the Christian should love to repay others if they have done others wrong? Think of Zacchaeus. He paid back fourfold what he had taken from others. He was a tax collector, and the tax collectors in the time of Christ, they basically took extra, put it in their pocket. It was just accepted practice. Everyone did it. But when he came to know Christ, he met with Christ. What did he declare? To anyone I have wronged, I have, abused my position and taken their wealth, I will restore to them fourfold, 4 times. And that's the attitude that we ought to have. In Genesis chapter 43 and verse 12, it says here, this is not a common example, but when the family of Jacob, the brothers of Joseph, they go back to their father Jacob, and they find all the money in their bag. And it concerns them, why is the money in their bag and so on. Well, Joseph had put it there. And in Genesis chapter 43 verse 12, when Jacob has to send his sons back, has to send Judah back along with Benjamin, what does he say? Take double money in your hand, and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. And so you see, he wasn't sure. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take double, just in case. Repay. How many of us, would do that? How many of us are so free with our money that when we are not sure, we will make sure to pay double back? Well, that's what where we have done wrong, we take responsibility and we recompense others. And then, of course, when it comes to others, we show mercy to others as we are able. Remember that the Lord's justice is filled with mercy. When you see someone who is being unfairly dealt with in your place of work, you should help them. You should stand for them. And not being a busybody or things like that. But if people are being ill-treated and so on, we shouldn't just let it pass by. If you are dealing with someone and you have that power, you have that leverage, you have that authority and advantage over them, don't take advantage of them. If someone is ignorant or not so able, deal fairly with them. we want to deal with people fairly, being considerate of them as well, being mindful of others. Not, I can take this advantage, I can squeeze as much money out of this fool as I can. Remember, what you would have others do to you, do also for them. We should do things in the right way when it comes to negotiations, when it comes to contracts, selling, when it comes to other people in our work and so on. We think of others. In the Bible, one of the ways in which someone is to think of another person, in Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse 18, it says, when you build a new house, then you shall make a parapet for your roof, that you may not bring guilt or bloodshed on your household if anyone falls from it. So when you build a house, in the Old Testament law, it has some of these civil instructions, these, basically it's like regulation, You build this house, you must have the fire safety precautions put in. You build this, you have to think about all these things so that others don't get hurt. But we know that when people build houses and so on, if they can get away with it, they cut these corners. These are the kind of things that people think about only when the government or the law makes them think about it. But a good worker, an upholder of justice and of truth, should do these things out of our own initiative. If we know that it will benefit others, even if it doesn't benefit ourselves, we should be willing to do it for them. And thinking in this kind of way makes regulation and so on a lot less tedious for us. Now, some regulation really is, because of people lobbying and people introducing it, and it really gets in the way of things and so on. But, by and large, a lot of regulation, and there are different industries with different levels of regulation and so on, are for good. They protect customers, or they protect employees, or they're designed to protect one group of people or another. But when you really have a concern for others, regulation is just what you should be doing anyway, or a guide for you, not just something that you have to comply with. And when we love justice, when we love truth, then things like this are not burdensome to us. They are, people say, bad for business and so on. To an extent, sometimes the government gets it wrong, no doubt. But for the most part, even when they do get it wrong, it's not in the majority of cases. For the most part, these things, they are to help others, and we shouldn't see them as a burden. Many people can. Then, in all this, of course, you want to deal fairly with yourself as well. You have to. You can't, as much as I'm talking about being merciful and having a concern for others, you can't, for example, if you own a business, you can't just give away too much, because it's at the expense of your colleagues and your workers. You can't just allow everyone to make mistakes and never correct them or rebuke them. You don't want to pamper people, but you want to do right by them. You work in some sense. There is that your own self-interest in it. You work in order to receive your wages and so on. And not in certain cases, you must be willing to let things go. Don't hold things to your heart and so on. But I'm not saying here that you should just let people run over you and take advantage of you. Remember, you don't take advantage of others, but there is a proper place not to let others take advantage of you. You can stand firm. You can deal fairly with yourself. And how do we balance this? Remember, just do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so don't, and as long as you remember that rule, I think it sort of helps us to be clear in our minds when we are becoming self-seeking or selfish, and when we are doing things, when we are letting others take advantage of us. Now, in justice and truth, remember that you don't do it just for a good outward reputation. Everyone talks about integrity. Everyone talks about, everyone will go and support some of these CSR initiatives and things like that. But be just, be truthful when it matters, and not just when it is an advantage to you. Of course, being just does have its advantages, but it's not just about managing your reputation. What about your conscience? Make no excuses for yourself. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Don't do it. And do what is right and what is good. Now, when it comes to truth, don't make excuses for lying. Remember, lying is not just with our lips. It can also be with our actions. We can act out a lie to deceive others. And there are many excuses that we give ourselves for lying. The first is, it's just a small sin. It's just a small lie. It doesn't really hurt anyone. Just a little lie. Well, consider this, if you consider it small. How many little cuts would you have on your body? Would you like to have on your body? How many little drops of poison would you like to drink? The smallness of lies that we, or at least the way we think about lies as small, as not causing so much harm, causes us to repeat it. Be so careful of that kind of thinking. Make a firm stand. I will be a truth teller. And remember that lies distance you from the God of truth and bring you closer and closer to the father of lies, which is the devil. And another excuse people give for lies are, everyone does it. Everyone is lying. You might be in an industry where it's like, where everyone is just exaggerating, just lying. It's just done by everyone. If you work in a marketing context or so on, many people, you've been on the receiving end, They try to dupe people. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a place for presenting things in the right way. And there is a place, for, you don't have to be truth-telling in a crazy way that you have to say every single thing every single time. But in some sense, when people argue about the finer points of this, a lot of time they're not really interested in being a truth teller. They're just finding excuses to justify their lies, justify their actions, and be careful of that. So what if everyone else lies? Yes, even Abraham lied, even Peter lied. But why should that be an example for you? The Lord judged them. The Lord was displeased with them because of their lying. Peter lied. He denied the Lord. But we should see in ourselves, yes, we fall into this sin from time to time, but it's no excuse for it. Don't make excuses for your lies. Another excuse people make is, I've got no choice but to exaggerate. You don't understand the position that I'm in. Well, the Lord understands. The Lord will never tempt you beyond what you are able to take. And remember, one lie leads to the other. Everyone lies to cover their lies. It's a vicious cycle. So be careful of lying and speak the truth. And people appreciate that long term. It's always, honesty is really the best policy. Another aspect of truth, of keeping the truth, is keeping your promises. In work, there are contracts, there are promises, and so on. Keep them to the best of your ability. If there's a particular time or an amount stated in the contract, keep to it. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. This is something that the world never thinks about when it comes to their promises and to their contracts. In Psalm 15, in verse 4, and it is mentioned elsewhere as well, is that the godly person is someone who swears to his own hurt and does not change. it continues, he who does not put his money at usury, nor does he take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. But just to focus on that first one, he who swears to his own hurt and does not change. Now, this is not saying that you should go and make promises that will hurt you, that you should go and make contracts that are disadvantages to you. It is that when you have made that promise, when you have sworn, when you have made that contract, you see it as something that you will hold to and that you will keep to, and that you will not change truly to the best of your ability. When you make a promise, it is always, or when you sign a contract, it is always with uncertainty regarding the future. You don't know what the future will hold. You don't know whether suddenly there will be a recession. You don't know whether certain things might not be upheld to in the bargain and so on. But on your own part, you must do all that you can to keep to the contract, keep to your promise. And this is what the Lord does for us. The people of Israel rebelled against the Lord. They made, in some sense, things so difficult for the Lord, but the Lord never broke a single one of his promises. He kept to them. You think of how often we have hurt the Lord, and yet he keeps to his promises that he will never leave us nor forsake us. And it's the same when it comes to our dealings in this world. If we follow a promise-making and a promise-keeping God, we also should keep our promises. Keep the truth. You know, in societies that have a legacy of Christian heritage, they have such a blessing because of the truth and the justice that has been built into their culture. You think of, for example, some of the Scandinavian countries and so on. They're very secular and very atheistic now, but they have long legacies of Christian influence and Christian values. And so they have some things that are just unthinkable in other parts of the world. You know, you have certain places, they just leave the product outside. Maybe a bit like our bookshop. You go and put the money in, you know, and there's no one to man the stall, to be a cashier or so on. And you find all sorts of other blessings that come with a Christian culture, Christian heritage. In some sense, we do enjoy that, even in the church. Nothing is perfect in this world, but even in the church, you know, the way we deal with one another is different from the way we deal with people in the world. And it is a real shame that we have to be so careful and suspicious of others so often in our places of work. It's the effect of sin in the world. But when it comes to ourselves, we shouldn't be so influenced or tempted by that we ourselves change. But we should be renewed and give ourselves to truthfulness, to justice, to do things righteously. So truth and justice. And then we come to our third value, which is wisdom. Wisdom. Now, remember that being diligent and being honest doesn't mean that we can't be wise. And sometimes people have this misconception that in order to be honest, they have to be simple. I might not be very clever, people say, but at least I'm honest. In Britain before the war, a lot of people had this sort of idea. A lot of the politicians were saying this. I might not be very clever, but at least I'm honest. Is their slogan, is their way of saying that you should vote for me. Now, of course, when you are living in a place where people are clever in how they are corrupt, how they steal your money, in some sense it is appealing, It is appealing, just to have someone who is simple and honest and so on. But no, we see that it is a bit of a reaction to knowing too many people who will take advantage of others. why shouldn't it be that we are both competent and honest? In that example in Britain in the war, these people who were simple but honest came into power, and they just couldn't stand up to Hitler. They just had no mind or no gifts to stand up to Hitler, and only when they were, when they stepped down and Winston Churchill came on, as a really gifted person, that the course of the war changed. And you want to see that the Lord calls us to be wise. True wisdom is what balances a foolish and a slavish dedication to work. We are not just, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be diligent, and just let people trample over us. How do we balance that? By wisdom. And in fact, wisdom, it doesn't just balance these things, it makes our diligence go further. We don't have to, we don't take shortcuts that are compromised, that are unethical. But if there is a legitimate and a good shortcut, why not? If there is a better way to do something, why not? Why be proud of working hard and accomplishing less if there's a better way of doing it? We don't have to be Luddites. Luddites is a term used for people who are against technology. Basically, in the Industrial Revolution, people, it's a long time ago, but that was the technology of that time. People in these sort of, for sewing, these mills machinery were designed for sewing. And also in England, the Luddites, these people, these tailors are these people who sewed clothes and so on. They basically went around smashing these machines. And they have ever since then been used as the example of people who are against technology. People who don't want to adopt technology, they're Luddites. They go around smashing technology, shouting against it and so on. We don't have to be Luddites. There's a proper place for using technology. There's a proper place for, doing things in a more efficient way and so on. It's only wise. And we want to be wise in our work without compromising on what we spoke about before, diligence and honesty and justice. We should be wise. Being wise is a requirement to doing good work. We must be wise in taking opportunities. Everything has a season under the sun. And we have to be watchful for the right season, the right timing to do things. Make use of the gifts that God has given you. And you should see that a wise person hones and uses their gifts to the utmost of their ability. Being diligent is not being the person who works the longest, but the person who makes most use of what God has given to you. And all of us are given gifts, They might differ in their amount, they might differ in what they are, but all of us have gifts. And remember, the Lord uses gifts. There's not a single man or woman in the Bible that was used by God who was not given gifts. You think of the Apostle Paul, he might be humble in the way he says it, but he was a gifted man. You think of David, he was a gifted man. Moses, he was gifted and he was prepared by God. He spent 40 years being prepared, honing his gifts. And all our gifts come from God, so certainly we must use them well, as God intends us to. Of course, as much as we use our gifts, we don't depend on our gifts. And as much as we use our gifts, we don't forget the Lord. But we do develop our gifts along the way. So don't work in a stupid way. Don't work in a foolish way. Work wisely in order to do good work. And pray that the Lord will give you wisdom. If any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives liberally in James chapter 1. And speak to wise people as you need to. And there is this thing called the Protestant work ethic. And in many senses it's true, because Protestants, as in evangelicals and in the line of Christianity that we follow, biblical Christianity, have historically been hard-working people, and they speak of the diligence of these people and the frugalness of these people. They don't spend a lot and so on, and there are theories created about this, about how this has created the modern capitalism and so on. But we want to know that yes, there's a Protestant work ethic, work hard, keep to your callings and so on, but it has also resulted in a lot of innovation, in a lot of accomplishment. Many Christian people, or many people influenced by this work ethic, have done so much. And all these things are done in wisdom. And wisdom for us, helping us to balance out the other values that we've been speaking about. And then the last value I just want to mention is contentment. Now, contentment can apply to many different things. Jeremiah Burroughs, he talks about it as the inward, this peace that we have in every situation and so on, in every trial or every difficult thing. And so there's contentment when it comes to difficulties and disappointments and trials. But contentment when it comes to work is that cheerful satisfaction in the place and calling where God would have us. And it is good and it is right to be happy in your job. That's what many people desire. That's what many people strive towards. But by that definition here, the cheerful satisfaction in the place and calling where God would have us, you must see that happiness in your job, Christian contentment, it doesn't depend on your job. It doesn't depend on your circumstances. It's not about you having your dream job. It's not about you having the best working day of your life. You can be content. You can be happy in your job if it is what God calls you to do. Remember in Philippians chapter 4, verse 13, in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. And of course, we think of that when we talk about riches and poverty and so on. But we might not be poor, or we can be content in our jobs. Think about it. How many of us are given to a complaining and a murmuring spirit when it comes to our work? But the Lord wants us to be happy, to be content, even when things are difficult in work. Yes, we have to meet with difficult people. Yes, we have to overtime sometimes. Yes, we have to face difficult circumstances. But in all this, we are to be content. And a content person is thankful. Remember that different jobs have different things to be thankful for. Some jobs are more comfortable than others. If you're going to compare your job to another, I wish I had your kind of job. And think of the many advantages that you have in your job compared to others. Some jobs have more flexibility and give you more time. Some jobs provide a lot more income. Some jobs are much safer. Some jobs give you more opportunity for witness. Every job has things to be thankful for, has good things. Some jobs are fulfilling in that you help others. Some jobs have longer holidays. Some jobs have, they allow you to better use your God-given talents. And so whatever your job is, don't fail to acknowledge God's providence and provision in your work. Remember that even in your difficulties, that your difficulties make it that you avoid other difficulties. A job that is more tedious, more monotonous, more boring, I do the same thing every day, tends to be more free from problems. A job that is more risky tends to be better paid. Some jobs give you the opportunity to learn more. Remember that there are good things that the Lord gives you. If the Lord has given you a job, there are good things that the Lord gives you. Of course, it's tainted by sin, tainted by difficulty, but it's good. Don't let, the fly spoil the whole ointment. Be content. And be content especially in times of disappointment or losses. Be content when you lose your job. Be content when you don't get recognized or you don't get your promotion. Remember to guard against the dangers of work, against ambition, against envy, against covetousness. If riches increase, set not your heart on them. And when we have this kind of attitude towards work, it improves our contentment. We remember the Lord wants us to be happy. And Christian contentment is such that we are happier the more we decrease, the more we see that we really deserve nothing from the Lord. The Lord has given us so much. And it allows us to enjoy our work. And it allows it, the key to enjoying our work. I'm not saying that you can't find another job or be wise, Wisdom might be that the Lord is calling you to another job. But the key to enjoying your work is cultivating contentment. And this is what helps us to persevere in our work, to not be quitters. The person, just like the person who can never settle in a church. It can't settle in any church because there's no perfect church that suits them. It's the same with work. Sometimes you have a problem in this place and that place and that place and that place. Why is that? You don't have contentment. And if you don't have contentment, of course, you will not persevere. Of course, you will quit. So remember to be content. And see that all these things come from God. Now, of course, we see some of these things in other people. Of course, we see them in unbelievers. There are honest unbelievers out there. There are diligent colleagues that we have. There are, people that are happy in their work, for sure. But see that in these, as much as these are available to any worker, and of course recommended to anyone, not just the Christian, everyone should be content, everyone should be diligent in their work and so on. But in the case of a Christian, they flow from a better principle and they are directed to a higher end. It is for the Lord. It is, it is something that we have the Lord's help for. You must see that as we know Christ, coming back to what we were talking about in Ephesians chapter 4, not only are we commanded to this, we desire it, we know that this is the best way, we know it is the right way, and God gives us the help to do these things well. And so we, how much we should, do good work. All these things, diligence and justice and truth and wisdom and contentment, they combine to form what the Bible calls stewardship, or faithful stewardship. Of God has put us where He will put us in our work, and we ought to do well. In Luke chapter 12, it says, "Who then is the faithful and wise steward, whom his master will make ruler over his household, to give them their portion of food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes." Luke chapter 12, verse 42 and verse 43. You see that we are faithful to our masters, we are faithful to the Lord by being diligent, by having integrity, by being wise, by being content in our situation. And as we do these things, of course, it benefits us. We reap the benefits of it. It pays to be the faithful and wise steward, faithful and wise servant. And not only that, it does good for our neighbors. And it glorifies God. And that really is our motive. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23, whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. And we just end with a quote by Arthur Pink to say that, to remind us that really how Christian we should be in doing good work. And the quote says this: whether it be in the factory, the mine, the office, or in the fields, one who claims to be a follower of the Lord Jesus should stand out unmistakably from his fellow employees who make no profession. His punctuality, his truthfulness, his conscientiousness, the quality of his work, his devotion to his employer's interests ought to be so apparent that there is no need for him to let others know by his lips that he is a disciple of Christ. There should be such marked absence of that slackness, carelessness, selfishness, greed, and insolence which mark the majority of the ungodly, that all may see he is motivated and regulated by higher principles than they are. But if his conduct belies his profession, then his companions are confirmed in their opinion that there is nothing in religion but talk. But we know that that's not the case. There's more to religion, there's more to Christ than hypocrisy. We know that the Lord renews our minds, and one of the ways we show that is by doing good work.